Hi again, everyone. We've learned a lot of information in the last 3 lessons. We started by looking at unit conversions, how to set up a calculation using dimensional analysis, and convert our units using conversion factors. Then we looked at how to convert specifically SI units or metric units. And then in this last lesson, we've learned the Sig Fig rules, how to determine the right number of Sig Figs in a number, and then how to determine the number of Sig Figs in your answer when you've used different operations. So here we're going to tie it all together, and there's a few things that are worth mentioning. First off, rule number 2, Sig Fig rule number 2, for multiplication and division, is the rule that we use most often in chemistry. You'll notice as you go through this course and you're doing calculations that most of the time we're multiplying and dividing. Sometimes we have to add and subtract, but a large majority of the time we're multiplying and dividing, and you'll find that you get to know this rule number 2 very, very well. For mixed calculations, where you have some combination of adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, you need to remember to apply the rules in order of the operations that you are asked to do. And if you are not asked to do them in a specific order, then we can rely on BEDMAS, which you might remember from math, which tells us to deal with brackets first, then exponents, then division or multiplication, then addition or subtraction. So we always start, if not told specifically what to do first, we would always start with our division and multiplication before addition and subtraction. Keep track of your Sig Figs, and this is what we're going to talk about in this lesson. I'm going to work through an example with you where we have to add, subtract, and or multiply and divide, and it's really key not to round until the very end of your calculation. And you might say, well, why wouldn't I round? Because that makes more sense. Then I can keep track of my Sig Figs. And the answer is that if you round early on in your calculation, it's very easy for you to end up with an answer that's not accurate. If you're rounding at every step and you have multiple steps, you might be losing some digits along the way. And even if they're not meaningful digits, as far as the Sig Figs are concerned for that step, they could affect the answer in the end. And so you could end up with an answer that is much too high or much too low. And had you left all of your digits until the end and then looked at your Sig Fig rules to determine how many you're allowed to have in your final answer, you will have not only the correct number of Sig Figs, but also an accurate answer. So, and then finally, remember that counting numbers and defined numbers, such as conversion factors that are exact, are exempt from the Sig Fig rules. And so we don't consider those when we're looking at the number of Sig Figs in our answer. So it is a lot of information to keep in your mind. I want to remind you that you have a couple of sheets in this unit that are going to be helpful for you, and you might want to print them out and keep them with you throughout the remainder of the course. And one of these sheets is called the Sig Fig definitions and rules. And so this one is available in the course for you to download and print out. And it reminds you not only how to figure out the number of Sig Figs in a number, but it also has the Sig Fig rules on it with an example for each one. The other sheet that you have that can be very helpful for you in this course is the SI units sheet. And this is just a summary of the base units that you should be familiar with for Chemistry 11. There's also 2 charts, one that shows the SI base units and the different prefixes, as well as the conversion factors that you need to move between. And then finally, there's 3 other equivalencies that might be helpful for you. So by printing these sheets out, you can have them all in one place as you're doing your practice problems, your quizzes in the course. Okay, let's do a calculation to start off with where we have to combine addition and subtraction. And I'm taking this one from the Hebden textbook. It's on page 40 if you want to refer to it again. And it looks like this. I'm going to give us a new page for this. So we have 50.35 times 0.106 subtracting 25.37 and multiply by 0.176. Okay, let's go ahead and find our solution. First things first, we need to consider the operations that we have here, and it's going to be the multiplication that we're going to carry out first. Remember your bed math. Okay, division and multiplication becomes before addition and subtraction. And so we're going to go ahead and do that multiplication. So I'm going to multiply my two numbers here, and my answer, and if I were to do this in my calculator, it comes out to be 5.3371. And before I move on and do anything else, let's think about the significant figures that we are allowed to have in this answer. So if I look at the numbers that I've used, I can see that I have 3 sig figs in the second number, and I have 4 significant figures in the first number. But 3 sig figs is all I'm allowed to have in my answer, because I must have the same number of sig figs as the least number of sig figs in my data. So I would have to keep those 3 sig figs here. Before you do this, okay, before you drop the 7 and the 1, and you would round that 3 up if you were to do that. Before you go ahead and do that, okay, recognize that if you round right now, you are going to lose these two numbers, 7 and the 1. So actually the value that you have really isn't 5.34. It's a little bit less than that. And because we have more calculations left to do, we don't want to round now. So we're not going to do that. Instead, what we can do is underline in red or with your pencil or pen, underline the number of sig figs that you're allowed, or in brackets beside it you might want to write 3 sig figs, just to remind you, oh yeah, that's how many I'm allowed to have. But don't round yet. I'm going to move this over here just so it doesn't confuse us, and let's carry on. Okay, I've got this subtraction sign, and then I'm going to do the multiplication over on the right hand side. So I've got 25.37 times 0.176 is equal to 4.46512. Let's look at our sig figs on this side. 4 sig figs in the first number, again 3 in the second number, so I'm allowed to have 3 sig figs in my product. And so 1, 2, 3 would end right there at the 6, but again, I don't want to round yet. I want to keep those digits there, even though I'm not going to have more than 3 sig figs in my answer. But let's carry on here before we figure out what our final one is going to be. So the last thing I have to do is a subtraction now. Okay, so I've got 5.3371 subtract 4.46512. We can go ahead and do that subtraction. It's going to come out to 0.87192. Just going to take you over here for a moment. Okay. If you were to do the subtraction down the page, okay, there we go. We're still doing the subtraction in the same way. Got a 2 here. Okay, this will become a 0. 10, we've got a 9, and that becomes a 6. We've got a 1. And then we've got 13 minus 6 is 7. Okay, make that a 2. And we have 8, and that becomes a 4, and therefore we've got 0. Good. So we get the exact same thing, but notice that with our rule for subtraction and addition, we are only allowed to have the correct number of decimal places as the least number of decimal places in our data. And because these numbers were the numbers that we're using, okay, we are only allowed to go to 2 decimal places. So in other words, we could draw our line. If we were to draw our line here, our line would be right here. Okay, in other words, these last digits after the 7, 1, 9, and 2, they are not significant figures, but we wanted to keep all of those digits in our calculation and round at the very end so that the number that we end up with is an accurate number. So we need to keep 2 decimal places in our answer. Okay, and going back for a moment, that comes from the fact that we had 2 decimal places here in our subtraction. Okay, both values had 2 decimal places when we considered the number of sig figs that they both had. So by underlining your sig figs, it helps you keep track of everything, but you're not dropping the values altogether or rounding too early. Okay, so there's our answer. Let's write that out. So my final answer here with 2 decimal places and therefore 2 significant figures is 0.87. The 1 is not great enough to round that 7 up, and so I'm going to leave it like that. Let's do another example. This one does not combine addition and subtraction, but I want to go back to some conversions that we did earlier on in some of the first lessons, and now think about our sig figs when we come to putting our answer down on paper. So here's the question we have. Convert 0.056 grams per second to grams per minute. Okay, so my first step here is I set up what I want is equal to what I have times what I know. Well, what I want here is going to be a rate in grams per minute. What I have is 0.056 grams per second. And what do I know? Well, my plan here, I can see that the only thing that's changing is the units in the denominator of my rate. So I'm going from seconds to minutes. And I know that there are 60 seconds in 1 minute. Great. So that's going to be the conversion factor that I use right there. I'm going to make sure that I have my seconds in the numerator of my conversion factor and my minutes in the bottom because I want to cancel out of seconds. And I need to have minutes in the bottom of my my rate. And I can go ahead and I can do this calculation. So I've got 0.056 times by 60, and it comes out to be 3.36. Okay, units are grams per minute now. Great. Now, before I go ahead and report this answer, I need to think about sig figs. Let's come back to the data that we used in this calculation. In my original rate, in my initial amount, I had 2 sig figs. Let's keep track of these. So there were 2 sig figs here. Now, what about my conversion factor? 60 seconds in 1 minute. Do I include the sig figs here when I'm considering how many sig figs I can have in my answer? And the answer is no. This conversion factor, 60 seconds in 1 minute, is an exact or a defined number. So because there's exactly 60 seconds in 1 minute, we're going to ignore these values when we're trying to figure out the number of sig figs in our answer. So 2 sig figs is what I need to have in my answer then. So let's go ahead and write that out. So my speed then, or it's not my, well yeah, my rate here, is going to be 3 point, I can round that 3 up because the 6 is greater than 5, 3.4 grams per minute with 2 significant figures in my answer. Here's another example. This is the question. In cases where atomic mass is calculated, the number of moles is considered to be a counting number. All right, let's think back to what that means. The 2 types of numbers that we can ignore when we're looking at our sig fig rules are counting numbers and defined numbers. Counting numbers are numbers that refer to anything that we can count. So a whole number, for example, books, dogs, people, number of people. In this case, it's telling us in the question that moles, the number of moles, when we're determining the atomic mass is considered to be a counting number. So, for example, if we have an atom of oxygen and it has a mass of 16 grams per mole, if we had 2 atoms of oxygen, it will be 16 grams times 2. And here the 2 moles is a counting number. So this is not a trick question, but it is testing you on whether or not you know to ignore counting numbers. Okay, so you would go ahead and you would do your calculation, but you would remember that it is going to be this piece of information, 16 grams, that determines the number of Sig Figs in your answer. So 16.0 has 3 Sig Figs, which means that my answer is also going to have 3 Sig Figs. So here it is. My solution is going to be 16.0 grams multiplied by 2 is 32.0 grams. And I must have 3 Sig Figs in my answer because I have 3 Sig Figs in 16 grams. If you, and often students make the mistake of thinking that a counting number does count, and so they sometimes round this to 30 grams, 30, with 1 Sig Fig, and that would be incorrect. Okay, I hope that this lesson has helped. By all means, if you have difficulty as you start any of the practice problems or doing the assignment or quizzes in this unit, please send your teacher a message or an email so that we can get back to you right away. Best of luck.